Hello, I'm Arik Korman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters, and a parent of a 5th grade son in the public school system. In case you're not familiar with us, League of Education Voters is a statewide nonprofit working with families, educators, and leaders to build a brighter future for every Washington student. Our website is educationvoters.org. Our vision is that every student in Washington state has access to an excellent public education that provides an equal opportunity for success. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime Webinars, even though this is not lunchtime right now. We started this series 6 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's webinar is about the state of education during COVID-19. And we are honored to have Washington State Teachers of the Year, Amy Campbell, 2020 from the Camas School District, Robert Hand, 2019 from the Mount Vernon School District, Mandy Manning, 2018 from the Spokane School District and the 2018 National Teacher of the Year, Camille Jones, 2017 from the Quincy School District, and Lyon Terry, 2015 from the Seattle School District, who's now with the Highline School District with us. These are unprecedented times in Washington State. Parents have suddenly become homeschool teachers, and I'm one of them, and educators are scrambling to provide equitable, continuous learning opportunities. In this webinar, the Washington State Teachers of the Year will share what they're hearing from students, parents, and colleagues in their community. We'll share insights on education during COVID-19, and we'll answer your questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback to us about the webinar quality either through the chat function at the bottom of your screen or through email at info@educationvoters.org. Welcome, Washington State Teacher of the Year, Amy Campbell, 2019 Washington State Teacher of the Year, Robert Hand, 2018 Washington State Teacher of the Year and 2018 National Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning, 2017 Washington State Teacher of the Year, Camille Jones, and 2015 Washington State Teacher of the Year, Lyon Terry. I am so honored to have you here and thank you for joining us. I would like to start off by just asking you that first question, which is, what are you hearing in your communities right now?
I'll kick us off.
Great, thanks, Mandy.
Mandy. I recently switched roles and I now work in the communications department for the Washington Education Association. And so I get a lot of information from across the state about how educators and parents and students and education leaders are feeling right now. And there's really a lot of confusion still. And every single district across the state is handling everything in a very different way based on how they're interpreting what's coming out of the governor's office and what's coming out of OSPI in terms of continuous learning. And plus there's this huge discussion around equity because what's happening and what we're seeing is that all of the inequities that existed within the system prior to the closures because of COVID-19 are now extremely they're highlighted and they're really out there and they're exacerbated. And so we have two options that we're seeing out there that we really tackle this equity issue now so that we can change moving forward and also ensure that we're not exacerbating them and making them worse in this situation because it really has the potential to become extremely worse. So there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of really good intentions, always good intentions about what people are doing, but there's not a lot of uniformity, there's not a lot of consistency. And so people are just unsure of what they should be doing.
I would say, this is Lyon Terry. One of the other things I hear from all my teacher friends and from the teachers at my school is a general sadness too, especially after last week's call that, school would be out until the end of the year. Like, there's a lot of connection and relationship building that goes into being a good teacher. And, all the thousands of teachers around our state now don't have those connections with our students and they're missing that. They're missing that time in front of kids and time in a school building surrounded by kids who they love. And that's really hard for teachers. So there's just so many different feelings going on for so many different teachers.
Yeah, Amy, what about you?
What am I hearing?
Yeah.
So I I worry a lot about what I'm not hearing. I think everything that Mandy and Lyon said about there was inequity in our systems previous to this, and we've been investigating that. We're seeing it now, and we're addressing it in a lot of different ways. And I think as I'm talking to teachers about the connections they're making, the fears they're having, it's the families you don't hear from, it's the work you don't see come in, and the understanding in all of this. I was in a meeting this morning, and one of the participants mentioned that in all the teacher conversations we've been having, I don't hear teachers talking about children cheating or children trying not to do work. We're having teachers talking about, I didn't see a check-in and I wonder what that means. And so it's what I'm not hearing that I want to make sure we're tuning into as we move through this.
Mm-hmm.
That's really thoughtful, Amy. I appreciate that. I think what I've been hearing the most is just how overwhelmed people are with all of it, from whether it's teachers, administrators, families, students. Everyone's just really overwhelmed. And, you know, here Quincy is a farming community, and so it's a very busy time of year. And so, you know, it's either families that are working and trying to figure out how to manage this learning for their students when they're not even home with them, or, you know, I'm home, my husband's working full time, and we have a toddler, and how do I work and get that done? And just even talking to teachers who have their own children, and they're struggling to understand what their children are being asked to do, and they're the teachers. And so what does that mean for people who are not in education and helping their, so just trying to think about all of that and understand where everybody's at, and give grace. I think actually OSPI, I wanted to bring that up. I think that they have done a great job with the guidance they've given us from the state, in focusing first on these basic needs that children have, and that the learning is our secondary goal right now, and giving a lot of support around what can we realistically expect to ask of students and their families, and giving, you know, sample schedules and all of that. I really appreciate that, but it's just going to take a long time to work through all of this change, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much, Camille. And Robert, what are you hearing in Mount Vernon?
Well, I have my virtual background on with Mount Vernon High School behind me because I wanted to feel a little bit more like I'm there, because I've missed being there so much. And I know that that's what I'm hearing from my staff and from my kids as well, is that it's funny, I would hear so many complaints before we had the closure about like, oh, I have to get up and come to school. And the difference in tone now from so many of those students that are saying like, I don't get to get up and go to school. It's oftentimes, you know, we don't really know what we have until we don't have it. And for a lot of our students, they're realizing that. And for so many of us, our schools are a community hub. Like we rely on schools for a lot of kids to eat 2 out of their 3 meals during the day. And so schools are trying to figure out how to get food to those students, and they're doing a tremendous job doing that. And, you know, it really, like Mandy said, it exacerbates so many of the issues and problems that we had before, and really highlights the importance of why these things matter so much. It's allowing us to see now all of these things that many of us were talking about before that mattered in terms of social emotional learning, and putting connections before content, not above or in place of it, because it's still important. But I always would say, are you putting at the beginning and end of your classes and days, are starting and ending with kids or with content, and really like focusing on those connections with them now. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk about distance learning and online teaching and all of that. And that is not what this is. This is emergency remote teaching, and it's not the same thing. It takes a lot of time and energy and effort beforehand to really design a functioning online learning environment. And we are all professionals and working really hard to do that, but this is not what anybody signed up for. And we're all doing the best that we can. So just giving ourselves grace and giving that to everybody else and asking for it in return. We're all in this together, and that's how we're going to get through it, is if we remember to give grace and stick together.
Yeah, thank you so much, Robert. And I want to say once again that you are collectively some of the best teachers in the state. I mean, the honors that you received are very well deserved. And so based on your experience and based on your empathy and based on your relationships you have with students and parents and colleagues, what do you think students need right now the most?
I'll jump in because I want to piggyback off of Robert's. When you, Arik, first put that question to us to think about, I immediately thought about grace, that is what everybody needs right now, because everyone's so overwhelmed, but no one's doing that on purpose. This, just like Robert said, this is not what we signed up for. We're in an emergency situation and we're all making do with what we can. So giving grace to others, but also accepting that grace in ourselves and just saying, okay, I'm just going to do the best I can, even if I'm overwhelmed by what's asked of me. And we all have to learn how to find the limits in this situation, because nobody really understands what they are right now. And that's something we have to learn together. We can't learn it in a normal way. We can't design it. We have to just figure it out as we go.
Yeah, thank you, Camille.
That giving grace is so valuable to our kids, because there are so many different feelings they're having right now. Like, as Robert mentioned, like I know a bunch of teenagers who were really excited at first, and now maybe they're not as excited as they sit around more and more in their rooms. And we have to give them grace to go through all the feels that they're feeling, from that excitement to that sadness, to that loss of friendships and teachers and relationships, and give them all those feels and all that opportunity to have those feels, so that they can, move forward in this crisis. Because that's absolutely what it is. This is not like how we want to do school, although I do think maybe we should talk about some of the things that, some opportunities we can take from this. But, this is not normal school, and we shouldn't pretend that it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amy, Mandy, Robert, what do students need the most now?
Well, I agree. I agree with Camille, and I agree with Lyon. We're in a situation that is uncharted territory for the majority of the people in our state. And I think because of the inequities that exist for distance education, the inequities that exist for even access to phones, right? Because we make a lot of assumptions. I think that we need to recognize some of the opportunities we have to really ask ourselves what school is for and what we want kids to gain from school and how we want them to grow, and offer them opportunities that are more along the lines of what does this mean for us as a society? What does this mean for the connections that we have with one another? What does this highlight for us about what some kids have and what some kids don't have? And how can we utilize this time and this space to answer those questions and to help kids feel safe, feel secure, not be scared in an absolutely terrifying time, and to ensure that they're not just having this, you guys still need to do your work, but instead, every single day, I think about you, every single moment.
Yeah.
And I love you, and I care about you, and I am here for you. I might be in a different place, I might be across the whole city, but I am thinking about you right now, and you need to know that, because I haven't left.
Right. I think if I can piggyback on what Mandy's saying, sorry, I hope I didn't cut you off, Mandy, but it was just a perfect segue into, we're always teaching. As teachers, we're showing the world what we value, where we invest our time and our energy. And I think in this crisis right now, the lessons we're teaching our children is what it looks like to be a learner. How are we vulnerable in front of our families and the community? I will tell you now, I am the Washington State Teacher of the Year, but I am just a human in my living room trying very hard to connect with families in a lot of different ways. My lessons are not perfect, and I'm trying to understand what my students need in a very difficult setting. But it's an opportunity to teach our students, as we're having conversations around equity and access and inclusion and what community looks like. Mm-hmm. We are redefining that right now for kids and showing them that the value is in the individuals and in the unique contributions we all bring and not necessarily the boxes we check on our assignments. So I think we need to be investigating as we talk about access and curriculum, what we're providing. There's this inherent belief, or I feel like I'm hearing from community that if kids have digital, they have better. But I don't always believe that's true if we're just dumping resources, websites, and other less vetted opportunities at families that can be just as under developmentally appropriate as poor worksheets. But I think as professionals, and teachers are professionals, we have this opportunity to build out curriculum in a variety of ways that centers on students and teaches them our belief in them as learners. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amy. Robert, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think in terms of what students need right now, we have a unique opportunity to be able to provide students a different way to learn. And we've kind of been forced into that, but I think I'm a little bit glad that we have the opportunity to do this. I think that it's one of the reasons I chose to teach family and consumer sciences, because it's applicable to everyday life. It's things that we all should be learning. And so I'm fortunate that it's kind of what I teach already. But I think that we all have an opportunity to be able to look at what are the things that we're wanting our students to learn, and how can we provide them opportunities to learn those things, but in ways that are applicable to their lives and that can help them and their families right now. For example, for myself as a student, I was not great at math when I was a young student going through, even through high school. It wasn't until I had a math teacher that actually gave me the ability to see how math applies to life that I actually then connected and kind of fell in love with it. And I lacked that up until the time where I was given the opportunity to say, this is what I need you to learn, and not in an abstract way, but in a way that you can see where you can use it and it applies in your life. That's what hooked me in and connected me. And so I would challenge people to think, what are the main ideas that you're trying to have your students learn? This is something that I wanted all of us to work on before anyways, but now we have the unique opportunity where it's like, okay, this is what I need you to learn. Let me think about the environment that you're in now and the things that you need to be able to do to help yourself and your families. And how can I somehow co-opt those things and say, let me give you this lesson to do, and this is a way that you can do it now that you're actually going to do something to apply it in life and help yourself and your family. And that's something that I'm hearing from families. One of the assignments would be, for instance, learning communication and organizational skills, and you can even like apply some math into this, but organizing like a pantry shelf or an area in your kitchen or your refrigerator or something like that, and figuring out how to take something that you're trying to have your kids learn and have them do something like that that's actually helping, and co-opt those ideas. That's something I think we should be doing anyways, but here we are given this chance to figure out how to do that, across all content areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. Go ahead.
Well, it makes me think a lot about, I didn't go into teaching to like teach content. I went into teaching to teach people, right? And every lesson I teach is not about the content, it's about how to help these people be better people in life, right? And if we can't make those connections, this is like, I think it's kind of forcing us, this like remote teaching thing is forcing us to make those connections a little bit and say, why does this thing that we're wanting our students to learn, why does it matter to them? I'm really forcing us to look at the why of what we're teaching and get at the why of how this improves their lives as people. Right? We're not going to be grading all this work. We're not going to be, like giving some sort of high stakes test. So like, it gives us this opportunity to look at that why we're doing all this work. And maybe it'll give us that opportunity to say that some of this stuff is not as important as we thought it was.
That's, we're doing some learning in my district right now. And what we've been learning is that, okay, we have our curriculum, we have our standards, and we teach those blank so that what? And that is what we need to focus on for the learning of our students right now. It's the so that part. Everything else is the background, but get them engaged and doing the so that, because that's what is relevant outside the walls of a school.
Yeah, thank you so much, Camille. That was great. So I am getting a ton of questions, as you can imagine. We have hundreds of people watching right now, And if it's okay with you, I'd just like to launch into it. You can send a question to us through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will try to get to as many of them as we can. Mandy, Robert, Amy, Lyon, Camille, whichever one of you wants to take a stab at the question, feel free. Don't feel like you all need to answer every question either, just because we've got so many coming in. But I'll start with this one. What guidance or information would be most helpful to the teachers you're all talking to on high quality online curriculum and programs?
I'll come back to that one again. One thing that we've also been learning is, and thinking back about how, families and teachers are overwhelmed, is that the more we can align K-12 across the district, the tools we're asking families to use, especially online tools, the better we're going to help our students to be able to access and use those. So if I have a second grader who's home with their 10th grade sibling and they're both working through the same learning platform, then the sibling's going to be able to help that student a lot easier. And so, as much as teachers, we really want to be creative and find resources that work for us and our students, and there's so many things online. If we can really try to rein ourselves in and hold ourselves back from that and just think about what's the district told us are our priority things, and in effort to help support our students and their families better, and not overwhelm them, to just kind of hold back and stick to those tools for a while, I think it would really do a lot of good for them.
Yes, Camille, I agree with you. And I think that keeping it simple is really, really important. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people who want to bring in, fancy new things or develop. This is not the time. This is not the time for us all to be learning new platforms and figuring out how kids can use this new cool thing. It's about what's going to work for this classroom in this moment across this district, and how can we ensure that kids have access to that, can utilize it to the best of their ability, that families can understand it and use it as well, and that's not going to overwhelm anyone, because none of us need to be learning new platforms right now or trying to incorporate new curriculum.
Yeah, along those lines, Mandy and everyone else, are there any free or low-cost resources that teachers should watch out for? Are there any red flags? Because there's so much stuff out there. What should they not share with students and families?
Okay, I think that teachers and educators who are, working directly with kids should really go with their gut. And I think that you should only be sharing things as from an educator's perspective that you are familiar with, that you're comfortable with, and that your kids and their families can navigate. And so I think that that's really going to be very it's going to be up to the individual educator and that classroom or that environment, because there's going to be some things that are overwhelming and then some things that aren't. I mean, of course, you need to look at the safety issues, like the things that we've been hearing about Zoom and people getting Zoom bombed and all of that stuff. But there's ways to safeguard against that if you know what how to use the platform. And I think that most places, I've heard from rural teachers who are using YouTube because that's the easiest thing to stream on a phone, and the majority of their kids do have access to phones. And so I think it's just, trust your gut and remember who your kids are, and whatever you're doing should be applicable to those kids in that, to your kids in that moment, in that time, because that's what we do in a classroom anyway.
Right. I'm just going to add briefly to what Mandy says. A lot of the resources, so I teach special education, and I think a lot of what I've done is new to me, obviously. So we say, don't try new things. I'm going to be honest, everything I'm doing is new to me. And so I'm kind of navigating that with my students. I'm trying not to dump on a lot of new information, but if I believe that they can access learning during this time, I'm going to need to innovate, which means growing myself and then being in connection with them as they grow their ability as well. And so some of the new resources we're using feature us as teachers, and I've been just really touched by the content I've been seeing, short lessons on YouTube and all kinds of materials that teachers, what materials should you send out? Exactly, trust your teacher gut, create things that center on students and student needs. You know your students very well, and don't be afraid to be in the content yourself, because part of what I'm teaching is obviously the materials, the lessons. I'm teaching families how I teach. I'm teaching families how I'm vulnerable, and I'm being present for my students. So even in asynchronous learning, where they're watching me on their cell phone later in the evening, they have Mrs. Campbell in their home providing reassurance. So sometimes the least vetted content, me on YouTube, is the best resource for my families.
That is great. Thank you so much. So here's another question. What can we do about students who don't have the opportunity to properly learn from home? For example, if they're being raised by a single parent and they have to go into work, or they have to babysit their younger sibling or siblings during the day because their parents have to work.
Well, I'll chime in on that. I think one of the things that we, again, maybe should be doing already before this is another opportunity to look at how we do things. But remembering that there are many different ways for kids to show how they're learning what it is that we're trying to teach them. We don't always have to like narrow everybody down into one box and say like, this is the worksheet. No, I don't care that you don't learn well with worksheets. I just need you to do that right now. But listening to kids and giving them options to show how it is that they're learning what you're trying to teach. One of the examples that I have right now, I'm putting together a choice board for one of my classes where I have like the different standards. It's kind of like almost like a bingo card, but I have the different standards lined up for what it is that I have left to teach in that class. And for each one of those, I have different options that the kids can choose from in what they want to do to be able to show me that they've learned in that category, what it is that they're supposed to learn and how to show that to me. And that gives them the ability then to say like, you know, these are the different things that I have the ability to use to show you that I've learned that. And because of my life circumstances right now, if you only gave me that, I couldn't have done that. But these other two choices that you have down here, I can do those pretty easily with what I have going on. So giving kids the opportunity to advocate for themselves and to say, this is how I learn best. I'm getting to watch that with my daughter. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and she's home now, and thinking about, you know, if they're asking her to go on and be active on a video chat, you know, she's pretty shy and quiet with that kind of stuff and wouldn't do as well with that. But if you gave her the choice to do something different, we know where her strengths are, and she would be able to gravitate towards that and say that's really more my speed, and she would really give you, you know, an awesome product in that way. So I think that, you know, giving kids the agency and ownership over how they show their learning is incredibly important before this time, during this time, and after this time.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Here's another question. A few of you have brought up how inequities are being exacerbated during this time. What is being seen in regards to the inequities regarding students receiving special education services? And what types of things are you hearing that are taking us forward to overcome those inequities?
Sounds like an Amy question.
This is, I mean, and you guys, I think all of us serve students who have special needs, and I'm seeing in the chat people are identifying that we have a large percentage of our population. 1 in 5 children has a disability, and so we need to make sure we're addressing how we serve students who need accommodations and modifications in their learning, and they don't learn in the, they just need something different. So I think everyone's experienced that, but especially for students with significant needs, families are struggling. A lot of what I'm hearing is even around how are we helping manage behaviors or manage the personal needs of students. In addition to everything else families are doing, schools provide learning for students and so much more, because learning for students with significant disabilities encompasses a lot more. So what I've been doing is videos for families to help them understand how they can support students. I have been saying throughout for all of our children, how are we giving parents the strategies they need to be able to teach about social emotional learning, to be able to teach about sensory integration, to be able to teach about structure and routine, the things we do in school that support our learners. And as horrifying as this is for everyone living in the moment now, I think this is not a one-time deal. A lot of families who I support have children who age out of our systems, and they experience a very similar trauma of losing their support. And so if, as a system, I'm glad that we are having global recognition now of what equity and access for individuals with disabilities means long-term, what inclusion in a community means long-term, because these discussions that are happening now will happen for families who have individuals with disabilities in their homes for the long term. And so it makes my heart happy that we're pursuing options and trying to all be activists for equity.
I think this is one of the biggest topics right now, because we're seeing a lot of people using students with significant needs or special needs as a reason that we can't do this or we can't do that, or on the opposite end, then we're talking about, okay, well, we have to expand and do this. And I think that this gives us this opportunity as well to not just think in those terms of how do we meet everybody's needs, but to really question how we do partnerships with families. Because if you think about one of the reasons that we're having this discussion so deeply right now, and it's so out there, is because now we're in a situation where parents are at home with their child with significant needs, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you did that at school. Not that they don't know how to take care of their child, but they now have this new facet, right? And so we need to be thinking about, how are we partnering with parents when we actually can be face-to-face with them? How are we involving them in the child's education? How are we ensuring that they know what we're doing with kids at school, so that if their child has to stay home, whether it's for a global pandemic or for because their child suddenly has fallen ill and is going to have to be out of school for a couple of weeks, how are we ensuring that parents know what to do as well? And that should extend to every kid, not only our students with special needs, but all of our students. How are we partnering with parents in rural areas where their kids take a bus 5-6 miles a day or longer? How are we partnering with kids in urban areas whose parents are both working and or who have a single parent home, and who are maybe the sole caretaker for their younger siblings? How are we communicating and creating that partnership, so when things like this happen, we have a relationship where we're ensuring that everybody's needs are still being met? It's not only this one group of kids, it's all kids. And that's what this is what we're talking about when we're talking about equity issues being so extremely highlighted right now. I wish they always were.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, sorry. Go on with the next question, Arik.
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to piggyback a little bit on what you said, Mandy, with this question, which is, we cannot ignore the implications of trauma for our students and families before, during, and after COVID-19 allows students to return to the school building. What are some explicit trauma-informed approaches that educators should be implementing when reaching out to families, especially those families who have historically experienced a great deal of mistrust with schools before the closures?
I'm not sure. Go ahead, Mandy.
No, go ahead, Lyon.
I was thinking about some of the things that, whether it's trauma-informed, we need to be really clear that to our families that we're caring for their kids still, that we still love them, that we still want what's best for them, for their basic needs first, right? So we're going to say, here's how you get your free lunch and your free breakfast every day, and this is where you go, and if that's not working for you, I'm going to figure out a different system for you, right? And we're going to take care of your basic needs first. You know, so there's like education needs, you know, like you take care of Maslow before Bloom's, right? And so you have to take care of those basic needs of our students. And, you know, trauma is absolutely one of those basic needs. And if we don't step up and say, we know this is a traumatic time for most of our families, for most of us, for many of our teachers as well, this is a traumatic time. And we need to be able to be there next to them and be there and say, what are the basic things that you need? Let's forget about your grade and forget about this worksheet you didn't hand in, but like say, what are the things that you need as a person to be whole right now? And we're gonna help you take care of those needs. And then we're gonna get to the other stuff.
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say, Lyon, great job.
What a surprise.
I think that in addition, we talk about grace, but I wanna also talk about validation, that this is a huge thing. In our classrooms, in our schools, we have a ton of understanding around like positive behavior supports and how are we interacting with students when they're in trauma. And we not only, we talk about co-regulation, kids are getting upset, and how are teachers staying calm so we can help children be more relaxed and stay calm with belly breathing and things like that. How are we helping parents understand the experiences their children are having, the way they're responding to the experiences that they're having, and then validating everyone within this? How are we validating over and over through our actions? What are we grading, Lyon? Like, are we handing out worksheets and then giving a grade away, or are we, how are we responding to different situations? And I think we need to model that validation. And we also just need to be explicit and say, I see you trying. I see you struggling. I see you. And that there's so much, when we talk about getting back together at the end, we need to make sure we've seen everyone.
Yes. And giving them that space to talk about their feelings. One of the best things that my son's teachers do, they have like a once a week check-in where they bring all the students who are able come together online, and the very first thing they do is they talk about their feelings, and they talk about what they've been going through. And I just want to connect this back as well to the question that Robert answered about what do we do for those kids who are, you know, there's not parents there, and there's because the parents are out, like they're essential workers, or they work, you know, and they can't be there, and they're caring for their siblings. I think, and this also goes along with what Amy just said, that we need to recognize that what they're showing in doing those things is a great deal of responsibility and maturity, and they're showing us life skills that they have that maybe we need to recognize as an asset. And so maybe this is an opportunity for us to reassess what we're looking at when we're looking at what kids need to know and be able to do. Because when we're saying that you have to pass, like you have to take this math test and get this certain percentage on this math test, but we're failing to recognize that they just made dinner for their 4 siblings, I think we need to question what our focus is as educators and as a school system, and we need to ask ourselves what we actually view as an asset in a human being, and we need to ask ourselves, what do we really want kids to know and be able to do? Do we want them to be able to do a math problem, or do we want them to be able to apply that math problem to feeding their 4 siblings?
Yeah, well said. And Mandy, I had just a quick question as a follow-up here that came in, which is, do you have any ideas to support English language learners in remote instruction? Are there any resources or tools that you find high value in? And that applies to Lyon and Amy and Camille and Robert too, if you know of anything.
So I actually reached out to my colleagues who are in the thick of it with trying to teach their English language learners. And it's been really interesting to talk to them about the things that they have seen that is working, and then the things that are not working. The main problem right now is just the pure ability to communicate with the families and with the kids, because our interpreters across the state, across the nation, are being really stretched thin, because interpreters are needed not only for school, but they're also needed for hospitals and medicine and a lot of medical questions and things like that. So we're like weeks out to be able to communicate with a Marshallese family. Those kinds of things, first of all. And so we have to be looking at that. And in terms of continuous education, I think that we need to think creatively about what it means to be engaged with and practicing English, and having an academic focus in terms of English language learners. Because I think we could be really creative about how they're practicing. And then the other thing that when I talked to them, was that each of the educators that I spoke with was using a different method in communicating with and reaching reaching their English language learners, and actually having a productive teacher-student, continuing that process with the kids. And each of them was using the method that they had already been using in their classroom. So I have one teacher it's just email, because that's what they had been doing while they were in school. I have one teacher who is using Blackboard because that's what the kids were comfortable with. I have another teacher who's actually mailing through the United States Postal Service back and forth with her students. We have ones that are phone calls. Some are using like Instagram Messenger, because that's how the kids can engage. And so I think that that's really the key, because there's not going to be any, specific resource. It's about what are your kids used to, and how can you maintain some of those routines and some of those processes with them, because that's the best way that they're going to be able to understand and be able to do it independently. But first, you have to think about how are you even going to communicate with the kids if you can't have someone who speaks the language communicate with the home.
Yeah, thanks so much. We just have time for one more question, and I'd love for all of you to address this if you could. And this question is, what are some positive changes that you hope will come from this time when we're finally able to return to our physical classrooms?
I think we've talked about a lot of things we hope for. And I think the key to getting and achieving any of those is going to be that we all, regardless of feeling overwhelmed or out of our comfort zones right now, that we really lean into those feelings and take one more step of a risk that we're not comfortable with. In my classroom, I always tell my students to do hard things on purpose, because we know there's lots of things in this situation and in that everyday life that are hard automatically, but it's in the risks and the hard things that we choose to take on, that's where we really learn and grow more. So whether it means that you're letting go of some of the control that you like to have over a situation, or trying new curriculum and digital tools or whatever, but as educators, I think we're only going to realize all the possibilities and the opportunity that we can find in this situation if we really do those hard things and find more hard things to do on purpose to make a bigger impact.
Yeah, thanks, Camille. Lyon, Amy, Robert, Mandy?
I'll start, I guess. I come back to what we've talked about already too. Like one, we have to remember now that equity is it's just becoming so clear to us that there are inequities in our system. And so we need to be better at allowing for that voice and choice, and using things like UDL and partnerships with families and parents and community members to, I think I'm hoping that we're going to have this opportunity now to really see that the school is not the only place where our students are learning. Mm-hmm. And that when we give them opportunities to learn in other places and validate that learning, that that's going to be worthwhile and important for the students as well. And that's a challenge for us as teachers to let go with some of that control of their learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks.
I'll add in that I think one thing I've been hearing is a lot of people talking about wanting to go back to normal. And my heart is there. Like I want to go back to the past and that comfort as well. And when this is all over, when we can say this moment, COVID-19 is over, then there is going to be this strong pull. Everything in our community is going to tell us just go back to the way it was, go back to that comfort, go back to that normal. But normal is a social construct. And I think we need energy from every stakeholder, from everyone in this conversation right now who's talking about what they're seeing and experiencing to keep the conversation moving. So I don't know what we need to carry forward with us. That involves everybody. But equity is at the heart of it, access is at the heart of it, and change in our systems is at the heart of what we need to do next year, or carrying forward. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're gonna make a new normal based on this situation, because we've addressed a lot of things that we've decided as a system we don't want to carry on with.
Robert, Mandy?
Yeah, I think that I've been saying it a lot, and it's something that I remind myself of all the time. I always say teaching is hard, growing up is harder. And I think now more than ever, we need to be reminded of that again, this is emergency remote teaching that we're doing. And it's really hard, but we're the experts at what we teach. And we have kids that we're asking to learn all of this stuff. And my kids are on a block schedule, so that they have 8 classes that they're trying to balance learning during the week, and in addition to everything else that they're dealing with. And one of the other things that I always remind myself and others of is that everybody's fighting a battle that you know nothing about. And so we might assume that some of our kids are in good positions to be able to do this. And you may have no idea what their life is like outside of school. And so I would say thinking about just understanding what it's like, remembering what it was like for you to grow up and how hard that was, and that it continues to get harder and harder. I teach seniors right now who were born during 9/11 and are graduating high school during the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's such an interesting way to think about bookending the beginning of their life and the transition now into the next stage of their life. And I would say if I'm asked what I would hope changes when we come back, there are probably a number of things, but 2 that are incredibly important. I would say one is remembering that we need to make time for the things that we believe are important. And what I keep hearing is a lot of us saying that we believe that the connections and the humanity are important. And yet, if we look back to our practice oftentimes and how schools operate, we don't operate in that way. We don't operate as though that's the first and most important thing. We operate as though the learning and the standards are the first and most important thing, not the humans. And it needs to flip the other way around. We need to remember that we're in the business of teaching people and of connecting with and helping and supporting families. That's one thing that I hope that we can flip, and really that people can actually make time for that, because it is the most important thing that we have to begin and end with. I would say the other thing would be making sure when we come back to schools that they are set up and designed in a way that best serves and is represented by all students that we are here to serve, not just a subset of those students. Our schools have traditionally been designed and upheld in a way to serve students who look like me and come from a background like what I come from. And the reality is that a great deal of our students don't look like me and don't come from the same background and don't speak the same language and have not grown up in the same way. And while I grew up in a school system that was designed to serve me in that way, one thing that I would hope that we realize when we come back to school is that we need to make sure that our school is representative of all of our students, and that they are seen and heard and loved and cared for equally.
Yeah. I just, that was so beautiful, Robert. And I think that is such an important point. And I hope we don't go back to normal, to whatever normal is, because this is such an opportunity to, number one, crystallize what we need to be for each other and to care for each other and to really focus on the things that actually matter, which are how we are connected with one another. And we need to ask ourselves what school is for, and how students can actually show what they're learning and what we want kids to know and be able to do in light of that knowledge that our connections are paramount and our relationships are paramount. And then at the end of the day, to practice explicit equity, which is not forget what this has made abundantly clear, which should have already been clear before, that we have a system that only serves a single demographic, and that's no longer going to be okay. And we need to explicitly call out that inequity, find where the problem is, and work towards changing it. So.
Wow. Yeah, thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Lyon. Thank you, Camille. This has been absolutely fantastic. I also do want to call out that, yes, there is a lack of racial diversity on our panel, which I think goes to what you're just talking about, that yes, our schools do not reflect the current student population, which is something we definitely need to address moving forward. I want to thank all of you who participated, everyone who submitted questions. Thank you to everyone who has participated in the chat. It was a very lively conversation going on there. If your question wasn't answered or addressed, would it be okay, teachers, if people reach out to you through Twitter?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay,
My
great.
DMs are always open.
That is fantastic. Also, League of Education Voters is aggregating resources available in communities across Washington State to help us get through this difficult time. You'll find our COVID-19 resources page on our website, educationvoters.org. Our next LEVinar is next Thursday, April 23rd, and it will feature Superintendent Chris Rakedahl on high school seniors and services for students and families. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, click on events, and then lunchtime LEVinars. I'll also send you the registration information through a follow-up email tomorrow. Also coming up in May, we're going to present a LEVinar on mental health and social emotional learning for students during COVID-19. Mark your calendar for May 7th. And we're also hosting a LEVinar featuring community leader Trish Zico of Taft Academy on Now is the Time to Redefine School. Thanks to each of you for joining today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to me, Arik at educationvoters.org. That's spelled A-R-I-K at educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and will be sent to you in a follow-up email, which should land in your inbox in about 24 hours. Feel free to send this recording to your friends and family and colleagues. And if you would like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, just go to our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. Each one of us has the right to feel safe and valued. We hope that you will join us in future LEVinars.